Valedictory lecture. This session will be chaired by Professor Ranabir Somaddar, and the speaker for the session is Anita Patil Deshmukh. We also invite Professor Shobhasachী Basuroy Choudhury to join us on stage.
But before she begins the lecture, I shall request Devasri to hand over to Dr. Deshmukh a set of our publications.
This was given to me by Balaji. So maybe you want to
Take an extra copy.
Thank you very much.
Actually, Devasri, now,
Am I just going to speak for that?
Dr. Deshmukh, she is a neonatologist and the director, as I said, of programs and principal investigator in PUCAR, that is Partners for Urban Knowledge Action and Research. She has worked for more than 30 years as a faculty neonatologist while also completing a master's in public health. With PUCAR, she has been working since 2020. This is 2005. Anita has been working on urban poverty, social determinants of health, and urban knowledge production. PUCAR's work in participatory knowledge production has been used and cited world over, for which she has received many illustrious awards and distinction. Her work with barefoot researchers in slums, the young people in the slum community in Mumbai, who document living and working conditions in slum areas, both raising awareness and making policy recommendations, has been celebrated across the world. Participatory research for social change continues to be the hallmark of PUCAR and Anita's practice. I fondly remember that we had invited her in 2015. Was it 2015 that you came last year? Yes, you came to Calcutta. So it's exactly after 10 years, and when I wrote to her that would she be able to visit again, so she very kindly and heartily responded, and Shatabdi and Devasri Rajat, they carried the correspondence, and there now she is again with us exactly after a gap of 10 years. Thank you that you have come, and would you like to speak from there?
Good evening, everybody. And I'm deeply grateful to Ranbir Da, to the Calcutta Research Group for this honor and this privilege of speaking to such an august audience of scholars, academicians, researchers who have come from local and global universities and research centers. I almost wonder if I even deserve such an honor. Before I start what I have to share with you, I have to share something very special with all of you. I have a very deep family connection to Bengal and to Bangla language. My sister, late Smita Patil, did 2 films with 2 of the most renowned Bengali directors, world-renowned, Satyajit Ray and Mrunal Sen. And her son, Pratik, did a Bengali film with Soumitra Chatterjee. So you can imagine the family connection I have with your language, with your literature, with your music, and with all of you in a different way. As a young girl, I was a part of a organization called Rashtra Seva Dal, me and Smee both. I remember dancing on an open truck, going through the entire city, singing a song, and I'm going to try and sing it for you. আজি দক্ষিণ দুয়ার খোলায়, আজি দক্ষিণ দুয়ার খোলায়, এসো হে, এসো হে, এসো হে, আমার বসন্ত এসো, আজি দক্ষিণ দুয়ার খোলায়. So I was connected to Rabindra Sangeet since 7-8 years of age. So it gives me a very special pleasure to be with you, and I'm especially thankful to Ranbir Da for remembering me and inviting me to this place. And now back to what I'm supposed to share with you. I feel like quite an outsider or outlier amongst all of you because I'm neither a scholar nor an academician like you. I have been doing, as Ranbir Da said, participatory action research, where we essentially train community-based youth to do research on the problems which are either in their own communities or in their own lives. And then, depending upon the action they gather, they should, depending upon the evidence they gather, they suggest small actions. They do some of them themselves, and others they suggest to the policymakers. So whatever I'm going to say now, I think most of that has already been said in last few days. You have some extraordinary papers from many scholars about cities and climate change. Hence you may say, oh, well, Anita, we didn't hear anything that was new to you. That is something new that you said. And if that happens to you at the end of my speech, please forgive me for that, because I think most everything I will be saying has been said and heard. Mostly I'm going to try and focus my speech or my talk on social determinants of health, and I will talk about it a little later. The central message of the 30th Conference of Parties, COP30, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change crystallized on November 15th, last week. And it says, the world cannot deliver a fast or a fair climate transition without re-engineering the financial system that funds it, embedding ethical framework that guides it, and strengthening the global cooperation that sustains it. So I think this is important for us to remember. But one of the most alarming warning has come from the Lancet. The Lancet Countdown is an international collaboration that independently monitors health consequences of changing climate. I'm sure some of you must be familiar with Lancet. The UN Sustainable Development Goal include ensuring healthy lives by taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. That is your SDG 13. But in COP30 at Belém, there is a huge focus on increasing finance by the developed countries who contribute the most to the climate change and are almost never ready to contribute in the similar fashion the funds that needed to be changing that. There's rarely a discussion about the poor, whether rural or urban, and how they suffer the climate change. At the current rate, the world is expected to double cooling-related greenhouse gas emission over 2022 levels, pushing cooling emissions to estimated 7.2 billion tons of CO2. This is by 2050. Despite efforts to improve energy efficiency, phase down climate warming refrigerants, this fast emerging threat to human survival is among the subjects which is being discussed right now. Let me give you some frightening data about our own country. India ranks third in terms of absolute level of carbon emission after China and United States, and is one of the 5 countries in the world whose vulnerable population will face the most exposure to extreme heat events over next 5 years. India's poor, 270 million of those who live below poverty line, which is $2 a day, and 64 million, or one-third of our population, living in the city slums everywhere. This is, of course, 2011 data, so I'm sure all those numbers are up considerably. They suffer the most in the coming decades due to climate change and disaster. I'm sure you know that 2024 was country's hottest year on the record, with heat waves affecting more than 24 states and union territories. Rural laborers, construction workers, outdoor vendors have been among the group who has suffered the most by constantly exposed to heat with little access to shade, water, and cooling areas. To underscore the vulnerability, the Lethal Humidity Global Council, global group, a group of experts and leaders is building an evidence-based understanding of how humid heat affects people and places. They're basing their research fundamentally in India. So in April 2023, to give you a little example, Uttar Pradesh's Balia and Deoria districts saw death of 200 people within 1 week. 200 people within 1 week died because of heat bulb or wet bulb effect. You know, I'm sure you have heard of wet bulb effect, where the humidity is so much that the sweat cannot cool your body, and then it can lead to lethal impacts, which also includes death. The erratic weather patterns, increasingly ferocious and much more frequent cyclones, storms, floods, cloudbursts, heat waves, and severe droughts affect everyone. But the poor, whether they are urban or rural, are affected the most by it. Globally, the urban poor, for the most part, are actually stress migrants, as all of you have said over and over in your papers, coming to the cities from rural areas in search of livelihood and better living conditions, which they never seem to get. They build economies of the cities that are engines of national growth. They build the lives of people like us by helping us in every which way. Yet, they end up in resource-poor neighborhoods, informal settlements, and remain unrecognized, unheard, and invisible. Currently, there are 750 million people in South Asia who actually have been affected by the climate change. That's a large number, isn't it? Unplanned rapid urbanization and severe social exclusion creates the deep vulnerability for this migrant population and makes them victim of climate disasters. In addition to their location, and we'll talk about it a little later, structural gaps like lack of access to livelihood opportunities, to education, accessible, available, and affordable healthcare, affordable transportation, and inability to access many government schemes which are there, but most of the time they cannot access it because they simply do not know that such schemes exist. And if they do know, a lot of these schemes, in our own experiences, are very difficult to fill out 20 and 30 pages of forms. They are in very difficult languages. They need to be uploaded. They are connected to their Aadhaar card. So if you don't have Aadhaar card, you cannot access this, you cannot access that. This is a story we have been facing since 2015 when we started working in Adivasi villages in Vikramgarh district, which is about 150 kilometers north of Mumbai. And we are struggling very hard to make people understand that these are all these 20 schemes available to you, and we are trying to help them to get access to them. In many tropical countries with predominantly agrarian economies, which is ours still, we have 50% of our population in agrarian economy, many of the migrants are circular migrants. They come to the city during non-monsoon seasons to find livelihood and go back to their villages to take care of their agriculture needs during monsoon. These migrants need affordable rental housing. Most of the cities or most of the metros closer, they do not have such most of these cities don't have such rental housing because of the land prices. This facility is non-existent. This reality predisposes many of the urban poor to lose their jobs, their shelter, which is mostly at workplace, and I'm sure you all have seen this during COVID, and then they become homeless in Indian cities. Cities are inherently at risk of disasters due to climate change because concentration of people, industries, economic activities, and assets in a very small area. Floods are among the most common causes of natural disasters in cities. Continuous urbanization requiring concretization and lack of or inadequate storm drainage further limits natural drainage system and increases flooding with downpours and cloudbursts. In 2020, the list of cities where serious floods and loss of life took place included Jakarta, Chittagong, Manila, Beijing, Buenos Aires, New York, New Orleans, Houston, and the list goes on and on and on. So whether you are in the south or in the north, this is happening everywhere. In all these cities, the people who suffer the most are the people who contribute the least to the climate change. Flooding is the commonest disaster in the cities, as I said. In 2005, we had cloudburst in Mumbai. Mumbai received 944 millimeters of rain in a span of 24 hours. It has led to 1,000 people losing their lives, 14,000 houses washed out, especially on the coast where the fisher folk lives. Most of the slums, which were located on the seasides, including those, were washed away. Pukar's office is it's a rented office. It's in a resource poor neighborhood, and it is built on a garbage dump with no plinth. What happened to us? Pukar office was underwater, 10 to 12 feet of water for 2 days continuously. It destroyed all our data. After that, we have become smart. Before monsoons arrive, every year in May, we have this exercise of putting everything up, computers, files, all the data-related things, and put it on the top. Otherwise, we're going to lose it all over again. So, but we became smart only after we were hit in the gut. In cities of Global South, informal settlements or slums are always located in hazardous lands where nobody else wants to live. Flood zones, low-lying dry riverbeds, swamps, marshes, steep slopes, and garbage landfills. We have been working in a mandala, in slum called Mandala, which is skirted by the garbage dump. And about 200 to 250 houses are literally in that garbage dump, and we often see children playing in the garbage all the time. We have been working there since 2015, doing multiple projects related to water, cancer, breast cancer, social determinants of health, etc. Another area in Mumbai, which is called Mehul, where there are a lot of chemical factories. The area there is, the air there is literally not breathable. That's an area where most of the slums who get bulldozed in the other parts of the city, they are relocated in Mehul. And I think somebody yesterday or day before spoke about these vertical slums. So Mehul has a lot of such vertical slums, which are 5 to 7 stories building. The homes are about 150 to 200 square feet. No window, only the door. The only difference from the other slums where they got bulldozed is they have a toilet in the house. But there is no light there. So even during the day, if you have to walk in one of those buildings, you need to have a electricity or a watch or a torch with you. So that's the situation. Research was done on those slums. A baseline inline survey was done within the span of 3 years. And researchers found, we were not it, somebody else did it. They found that after 3 to 4 years of staying in these buildings, people end up getting, large percentage of them got TB. These homes are given to the slum dwellers for free because their original homes were bulldozed by a BMC. So article that came actually in newspapers was titled, "Free Houses, Free TV." I'm sure you have heard of, somebody must have heard of it. Poor conditions of structures as well as lack of services compounded by impact of hazards on the urban poor and increases their risk. In Sao Paulo, 20% of the land where slums are located is subject to geotechnical hazards, vulnerable to landslides and washouts. Many informal settlements can be seen on hills prone to landslides, as in Chitgaon, or in deep ravines, as in Guatemala City, or lands prone to flooding or tidal wave inundation in Recife, in Monrovia, in Lagos, Bombay, Bangkok, Accra, Jakarta, Buenos Aires, Rio, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, and Joburg. These are very famous cities with really a large poor population living in slums. The slum density is measured by two things: combination of population density as well as density of the dwelling unit. So it is not surprised that due to high cost of urban land, slums have a very high population and a dwelling density. If I have to give you an example, 11 to 15% of Delhi's population is located in 0.5% of the land. And Mumbai's 87 million, which is a low number, trust me on that, which is 42% of total population, people live on 0.8% of Mumbai's land. So imagine what it does to the people who live there. Most poor people who live in slums build their homes with material that absorb huge amount of heat, those blue, whatever you guys call it, blue plasticky things, right? Or asbestos, because it is cheaper than tin. Although asbestos is banned in most of the other world countries, we continue to use it in India, even though when we know that it gives rise to lung cancer. So they absorb large amount of heat, making home unbearably hot, lack of windows or ventilation with extreme density within home as well as within the locality, total absence of trees, of open space. This creates what we call an island heat impact. Heat waves caused at least 6,167 deaths across India in last decade, and I'm sure this is an underreported number. Yet, until 2 years ago, heat wave or heat issues were not even included in the disaster management plan of this country. That got included just in 23. Until then, it was not even included. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh lost 216 to 261 hours of potential work per employed person due to heat exposure. And you know what was the work hours lost globally? 88 hours. So see the difference. 88 hours globally versus 261 hours in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Since both Mumbai and Calcutta are coastal cities, this information which I'm going to share with you is important for us. India's coastal cities face an increase in risk of flooding driven by a warming world and now frequent extreme weather events. While some cities are at a highest risk, these imperils the lives, livelihoods, and critical infrastructure. Globally, the mean sea level has risen by 20 centimeters since 1800 and is now rising at a rate of 3.22 millimeters in recent years. Estimates suggest that this could increase by up to 1 meter by the end of the century. Only 2% of the world's land is in low elevation coastal zone. What does low elevation coastal zone means? The land which is bare less than 10 meters above the mean sea level. Calcutta and Bombay fit into the low coastal zone. This zone is home to 10% of the world's population. Can you imagine that? 10% of the world population sits in this coastal zone. So imagine what is going to happen to us by 2050. Flooding caused by rising sea levels is already affecting beaches, monuments, industries, ports, human settlements. Large areas of cities may become unthinkable as a result of flooding. And all the researchers and scientists are telling us, at least in Mumbai, that by 2050, Mumbai will be totally submerged under the water. This is a known fact. So there is now some thought or some talk about whether we should prepare the coastal people. And remember, the most wealthy, the richest of Mumbai are right at the seacoast. So there is some talk about whether they need to be moved back. Safeguarding coastal infrastructure, freshwater sources and livelihoods from flooding and saltwater insurgence in coastal region is the responsibility of the respective state governments. For example, in order to prevent coastal flooding in Mumbai, the Maharashtra government and Mumbai civic body have included building flood resilient systems and infrastructures. This is a part of Mumbai's Climate Action Plan 2022. You will be very happy to know that the person who is heading this is a Bong. His name is, he's IIT professor and an IPCC author, Subimal Ghosh. I hope I'm correct. Is that, I'm pronouncing is okay? Subimal? Okay. What he says is we have the necessary technology to work on coastal flooding, but we need implementation. Cities like Mumbai need early warning systems, increase of stormwater drainage network, and redesigning the intervention to expand their capacity. He also pointed out how long-term models that predict future sea level rises in specific detail cities have a lot of uncertainty built even now. Therefore, both the studies have acknowledged that. What is happening in Sundarban, I think one of you have already talked about it in details. Displacement due to cyclones in the coastal cities causes separate issues like disruption of education, of livelihood, and especially safety of adolescent girls and boys. Gender injustice becomes even worse. The inequalities rise. This is severely due to climate change because climate change actually intersects with gender inequality, with patriarchy, with power relationships, and this has given rise to increase in the number of child marriages that are happening in South Asia. I just saw somebody nodding their head. 1 in 5 girls is married before 15 years of age in South Asia. So, and now this is only going to get worse as the climate change causes disruption of life. The thinking about this is both ways. One less mouth to feed, one thing, and on the other side where she gets married into the house, 2 extra hands to work. So both ways, girls suffer. In dryland cities where rainfalls have always been low, drought is the most important issue, and it gets accentuated by climate change, leading to drinking water shortages, heat strokes, poor farming yield, and food shortages. Dryland cities are also prone to desertification and sandstorms, which have severe effect on health and on infrastructure as well. Droughts also result in increased dust pollution, which can cause respiratory illnesses of all kinds. Studies have shown that children in Africa who were born in the drought years are significantly more likely to be malnourished and stunted, while contamination of water supply is also a risk in cities where the water supply is difficult. In our own research in the slums of Kaula Bandar, so Kaula Bandar is a slum, it's actually a wharf which jets into the sea surrounded by water on 3 sides, and it's connected to land only on one side. It's a illegal, unrecognized slum because it sits on a federal land. It's not a land that belongs to the local municipality. Therefore, they get no services, right? No water, no electricity, no toilets, no waste disposal. For 15,000 to 18,000 of population, they have 8 functioning toilets. So you can imagine the long lines for toilets, and they do not get tap water or any kind of water, so they have to actually get their water from water mafia. And this is a big industry in Mumbai, in many slums, the water mafias. And this is how it works. The water mafias are usually sycophants of the politicians who are locally elected. So they will send the water, they make arrangements for the water, especially in summer. They will say, okay, I'm going to send you the tanker and you're going to get water. At least in Maharashtra, all the local corporators get 1 crore of rupees to spend on their constituents. So actually they should be doing this for free, right? But it doesn't work that way. So water is sent either through water mafias or through the trucks to the slum dwellers. For 15 liters jerry can, they have to pay 5 rupees. And on top of that, they have been told, okay, I provided you water, right? And you know what you're going to do? When it comes to election, you shall be voting for me. And if you don't vote for me, next summer, I will not send you any truck or any tanker. This is how it works, and I'm sure many of you guys are probably familiar with this situation. So this is how it works. So in Kaulabandar, what we have noticed that we actually did research on the water which was delivered to them by water mafias. We looked at it biologically in 3 different seasons, in winter, in monsoons, and in summer. And of course, the E. coli contamination of the water was highest during monsoons. In Maharashtra, rains have become more concentrated with fewer and heavier storms, and it being seen everywhere. I very recently traveled by road a district called Marathwada, not a district, but a huge area called Marathwada, which is traditionally known for droughts and also known for farmer suicide. In 2024, a total of 2,635 farmers committed suicides in Vidarbha and Marathwada. This is the story of that area where I just traveled. My travel was about a month ago. The entire area was inundated with 10 to 12 inches of water. All the crops were gone. So in an area which is known for droughts for years and years and years, suddenly is now drenched with this kind of rains, which came quite suddenly, untimely, and destroyed all the crop. So now imagine what's going to happen to the food production and the food prices. Rainfall over a long period may produce a gradual but persistent rise in the river levels, which then inundate the surrounding land for days and weeks at a time. Flooding of home happens all the time. In our own research in Kaulabandar, 30 to 35% of the homes which are built around the wharfs get flooded. There is a leaking of the roof. It creates more humidity in the house and makes it very difficult. Heavy rainfalls, which may become more frequent and more intense as a result of climate change, are also linked to increased incidence of landslides that we have witnessed over Wayanad over and over again. One of the key factors which affect all these cities is a lack of sufficient drainage, which leaves people vulnerable to flooding after heavy rains. I think this, again, was covered quite well in some of the papers, so I won't go into that. In Mumbai, the sewage network is the only able to operate at 40% of its capacity because it is usually, first of all, its capacity is less and then it is obstructed by plastic, by garbage from the slum which is not picked up, and many other things. So what did the BMC do? The local corporation spent 7,000 crores on flood mitigation and preventing waterlogging in Mumbai by desilting works and stormwater drainage. The data further showed that out of this 7,000 crores, 1,000 crores had been spent only on desilting the Nallas and Mithi River. End result, it's all gone down the drain, all 7,000 crores, because Mumbai floods exactly the way it has been flooded all these years. Nothing has changed, there has been no improvement. So now you can think where the money went. In Harar, women actually use sand to clean kitchen utensils, which block the drain, and polythene bags, of course, do the same thing everywhere. Slum settlements do not have any waste collection service, so they easily block the storm drainage. In Bogota, Colombia, poor households are located close to earthquake fault lines and face disproportionate burden, almost twice the seismic risk compared to the higher income households. With rapid urbanization comes the challenge of providing basic services to growing population, often to people with limited means and living in informal settlements. And usually cities don't have this kind of capacity. There is also a perception that poor people want everything for free. Huh? Usually this is what people say. These guys, they don't want to pay taxes and they want everything for free. The reality is far different than what it is. So in our own research in Kalabandar, the residents pay to water vendor 50 to 206 times the standard municipal water charge of 2 rupees and 25 cents for 1,000 liters of water, which is paid by people like me. So imagine, the charge I pay for 1,000 liters is 2.25 rupees. The person in Kalabandar for the same thing pays anyway 52 times more or 206 times more, depending upon the season. Now, this was a big research we did over 2 years. So we have all the data, the paper is out there. All our papers are actually on Pukar website as well as on PubMed, so you can find them anywhere. This represents, this 52 to 206 times, represents 6 to 16% of average monthly household income in Kalabandar, a spending level that in some cases can be catastrophic. Due to highly unpredictable water timing, 39% of the adults reported that water situation adversely affects their or their family members' ability to go to work, go to schools, and again, we have documented this very carefully. So what we did is this: over the last 7 years, we collected the water data in 4 different slums located in 4 different areas of Mumbai. Okay, first of all, you need to understand one thing before I go further. In Mumbai, everybody gets water only for 2 hours, okay? Whether you are in Taj or whether you are in a slum, you are going to get water only for 2 hours. The only difference is, in a slum, the pipe that brings you water is this small, and the pressure is almost non-existent. The pipe that brings water to Taj is probably this big or even bigger and has huge pressure. So people living in Taj can take a shower 3 times a day, while people in Kalabandar can barely get drinking water. So this is the only difference. Everybody gets water for 2 hours. So we decided to do a study of water, who gets when, how many taps, how much it takes them to, how much time it takes, what kind of distance they have to go, how much time the woman has to spend getting a matka full of water, all of that in details. We took all this data and gave it to an organization called Pani Hak Samiti. Their idea was that everybody should get water. Pani Haq Samiti launched an IPL in Bombay High Court. Huh? They fought it for 4 long years for the simple thing that everybody, every citizen of Mumbai, citizen or non-citizen, should get water. After 4 years, finally the verdict was given by Bombay High Court that every slum dweller or a city dweller should get 50 liters per head per day, which is mandated by WHO for keeping in a reasonable health. After giving this verdict, you know how long it took for the BMC to execute this? Another 4 years. Now, I know this with great disdain because 5 of my colleagues, Bali, Nizam, Kajol, Ruman, and Shahzade, they all live in Kalabandar. They all started out as barefoot researchers in 2009 when we started working there. Later on, we hired all of them, and today they have been my colleagues since 18 years or whatever. That's how we know in details when they get water, how much water do they get, how much money they have to pay. All of this in details is known to us. So this was very helpful to our research also. So this is what happens. In Kalabandar, at least 25 to 26% of the homes even don't get 20 liters per head per day, which is a dangerous area as far as WHO is concerned. The housing in low-income urban settlements need to be of poor quality, tend to be poor quality and located on precarious sites. Because there is always this threat of eviction, people don't put any money into improving their households. From the perspective of managing the risk of disasters, the collapse of one poorly constructed structure can trigger the collapse of multiple houses, and the accumulation of debris can block access to relief. Some of you who have worked in the relief will probably know this. We have seen this in Mandala when there were tremendous amount of rain came through, houses collapsed. One house collapsed. Because of the density of the houses, the next 6 houses collapse. This happens a lot. For example, collapse of a building after an earthquake can cause a major fire that in turn damages the other structures that had not been originally affected by earthquake. Research conducted by the Architectural Institute of Japan in 1997 on the great Hanshin-Iwaji earthquake highlighted that poorly constructed houses compounded the severity of the impact. The rubble blocked transportation network, prevented effective firefighting, and made recovery more difficult. Heavy rains, floods, mud flows, and fire often decimate homes of the urban poor. Access to roads and transport services are critical for mobility to jobs, education, markets, health, and during extreme weather also to safety. Often the quality of roads in urban slums is very low, hampering service provisions, and during floods or other disasters, preventing emergency vehicles from getting residents. I will tell you another story of Kalabandar. I have a lot of stories to tell you about Kalabandar. So in Kalabandar in 2010, we had a fire. Early morning fire around 5:30, right? So Bali, Nizam desperately called, Anita, we have a fire, come. So whatever, we took all our teams and went there. We started helping people coming out as best as we can while we call the fire brigade. Now, fire brigade station is barely 22 to 25 minutes away from where Kalabandar is situated. We kept working as much as we could. Fire brigade didn't arrive until about 2 hours and 15 or 20 minutes. Then they could not get in anywhere because the lanes are so small, but they at least took the pipes and started throwing the water. We asked them a simple question. Why did it take you 2 hours to come when you are right next door? Can you imagine the response we got? Anybody? Come on, guys. You are smarter than me. Traffic? Sorry? Narrow roads? Water is not available? You know what their response was, which is probably true. They said, but you are not on our map. You are not on BMC's map. So we couldn't find you. So we had to hunt and hunt and hunt. Where is Kalabandar? Nobody knows because it is not on the map of BMC. This has happened to us a lot when we went, we did research on immunization. This is another story. We did research on immunization and we found the immunization rate in that slum was 29% compared to 72% rest of the city and 66% in the slums which were recognized. So we said, oh, something has to be done. So we took the data and went to the health commissioner. Manisha Maiskar was the health commissioner. She said, she listened to us for 2.5 minutes and she said, but I can't do anything because you don't belong to BMC. This is it. So we had to plead and plead and plead and she said, okay, I cannot give you a primary health center, which is what they deserve after 15,000 of population. They said, no, primary health center is out of question. So what can we do? We can send you a team of doctors who will come twice a month and then you collect all the people and collect all the children and get them immunized. But she came to figure out whether actually we really existed because it is not on her map. Same story. So she said, I have to first come and ensure that you actually exist before I can do all of this. This is what happens, and remember, the entire eastern waterfront of Mumbai belongs to federal government, which means it is on nobody's map. That means municipality can say, hell with you. As far as we are concerned, you don't exist. And unfortunately, in India, the federal government doesn't have any policy of people who are sitting on their land because they say, as far as we are concerned, nobody exists on that land. The land is empty. This is how it works. And this is classically how it works. Roads. Roads, I think many people talked about roads in the last 2 days. Roads get washed out completely for, I think, the entire monsoon season this time. Me and my team could not access our field office because in the field office is all the way inside the slum. The road, gayab. And I have seen, while walking, I have seen many rickshaws topple upside down because the water is 7, 8, 9 inches on whatever the area is. And there are big, big potholes that the rickshaw guy cannot see. And the rickshaw goes in there and topples. People are injured. Machine is broken. The rickshaw is broken on all of this. We have seen this everywhere in Mumbai. Accessing people, accessing markets, accessing healthcare systems, schools, everything comes to a dead halt because the roads are wiped out because of heavy rains. Okay, many impact of climate change and natural hazards on the urban poor are most notable in risk to public health. Exposure to changing weather patterns, intemperate precipitation, sea level rise, and more frequent earthquakes and landslides have direct consequences to people's health, morbidity, and mortality. Many communicable diseases are highly sensitive to changing temperatures and precipitations. These include especially vector-borne diseases such as malaria, dengue, chikungunya, and of course waterborne diseases such as diarrhea and cholera. The pathogens that cause these diseases thrive in living conditions characteristic of typical found in slum. In Social Determinants of Health, which was pioneered by Sir Michael Marmot, he has clearly shown how through multiple global examples, how living in poverty decreases the longevity. And I have got to tell you, Dr. Michael Marmot is a professor of epidemiology and public health in University College London. And he was the person who actually pioneered social determinants of health. Now I'm going to ask you one simple question. if we take, say, 100 diseases which affect all of us as humans, how many of those diseases you think are related to our genetics or our body compositions, which are real diseases, you know? What percentage of diseases are related to our genetic compositions or our body compositions which causes illnesses or diseases or problems or health problems? Any guess? Take a wild guess, yaar. Usme kya hai? Huh? 10 to 12? She is so close to the numbers. It's 20%. Somewhere between 15 to 20% diseases are actually our own, genetic or body related. 70 to 80% diseases are caused by the determinants in which we live. So, Marmot has clearly proven that where you're born, where you're raised, where you're educated, where you work, and where you age. These are the areas which actually give you 70 to 80% of the diseases that we all face. This was his big discovery, and I think when he actually talked about it, it was a big opposition to the health systems, because by the time he came out with this, until then everybody kept talking about improving the health systems, the systems that deliver health. Nobody talked about social determinants of health. He did a very famous study called Whitehall study, which is done in the Whitehall area of London. He did it over 2 decades. He looked at all the people who work in a government office, starting with the chaprasi and the delivery boy all the way to the officer. He looked at multiple issues related to their health, and he found that the poor people in the same office had 3 to 4 times more morbidity and mortality compared to somebody who was an administrative officer. I have got to share with you 2 researches that were done in Chicago. I was in Chicago for a very long time. So in Chicago, University of Chicago is located in the south side of Chicago, which is where most of the black population lives. And I think many good universities in America are located in difficult neighborhoods. University of Chicago has its own zip code, and I'm sure you all know that it is called a Nobel factory. It has 34 Nobels already, and they are waiting in the line for a few more. So the people who live in that zip code are like you know, they are researchers and they're scholars and academicians and students, usually not in the lower rung of economic livelihoods. The people outside of the zip code are all African American people or blacks who are poor, living in slums or poorer neighborhoods. The study was done comparing longevity between University of Chicago zip code and the next door zip code. And guess how much was the difference between the longevity of these 2 groups? I'm keeping you awake? Are you? How much do you think was the longevity difference? 7 years. 7 years. And then the same black group was compared with the neighborhood on the north side of Chicago where all the rich people live, white people live. That difference in longevity was 11 years. 11 years between where the black people live and where the affluent rich people live. What does that tell you? That's called social determinants of health. And we have done a lot of studies on that. I personally have done a lot of studies on that. So while research on the impact of climate change on vulnerable population is still in the early stages, The link between urban poverty and ill health is already well established. In its fourth assessment report, the IPCC has warned that changing weather patterns are altering the distribution of some infectious disease vectors and worsening existing health conditions. The report also predicts that adverse health impacts of climate change will be greater in low-income countries, and the urban poor in all countries will be at the greatest risk, apart from the elderly, children, and coastal population. This is IPCC report. Despite their proximity to better health facilities than people in the rural areas, the urban poor often do not have availability, accessibility, and affordability of healthcare services. I'll go back to Kala Bandar. So now we have to get all these kids immunized. So we keep telling mothers, why aren't you giving your kids tika? Right? We got two reasons. One is the mothers will say, my kid is nicely playing, now you're going to give him tika, then he's going to be sick for 2 days, and then I have to take off from work. And then I'm going to lose 500 rupees. I cannot afford it. So I'm not giving tika. The second reason is, the hospital is 3 kilometers away, there is no proper road that I can walk to, and the hospital closes at 5 p.m. By the time I come back, hospital is closed. So how can I get my child immunized? This is something we run into all the time, that people don't want to take medicine. We did a study of 3 long years. Sorry, I'm moving away from climate change, but these are the stories you probably will remember. All the numbers that I have shared with you about climate change, you may not remember, but the stories you will remember. So we did a project on people in Mandala who were suffering from diabetes and blood pressure, right? So we followed a family, 60 families over a period of 3 long years, visiting them every week and then interviewing them every 15 days. What was the idea? Idea was that somehow we need to convince them that you have to take your medicine every single day and look after your diet and do exercise and this and this and this. This is the conversation I will have plenty of times. The guy will say, but why should I spend money, 400 rupees on this silly pill when I don't feel sick? Because when you have diabetes or blood pressure, you not necessarily have fever or headache or body ache or this or that. So I don't feel sick. Why are you asking me to spend my 400 rupees every month to get this stupid pill? I'm not doing it. This was a conversation I will have over and over and over again. And when I would try to tell him, Ki, Baba, if you don't do this, you know what, then 6 months later, 8 months later, you will be so sick, then you will be in the hospital, then you will spend 10,000 rupees. That's too much of an abstraction for this guy. He says, Jab hoga tab dekha jayega na. I'm not spending 400 rupees right now. After following them for 3 years by interviews, when we actually analyzed our qualitative data, we found out that about 19 to 20% of the people ultimately changed around 18 to 19 months, and another 20% changed close to end of the project. So totally 40% changed their behavior and started taking pill every day. Remaining 60% did not change. Changing human behavior is one of the most difficult thing to achieve. And we struggle with this all the time. Oh, let me get back to climate change. Okay, where was I? Okay, climate change is expected to expose 90 million more people in Africa to malaria by 2030, which is 14% increase because of expanded mosquito breeding ground and because the disease is now spreading to higher altitudes. Dengue fever is expanding in its geographic range. Climate change is expected to double the proportion of the world's population at risk from 30% to 60% by 2070. This is World Bank report. Forced evictions are the most extreme manifestations of climate change, as you have seen. And of course, tenure insecurity. At least 2 million people, mostly those with worst housing, are forcibly evicted by local government authorities every year. Recent data reveals that forced eviction worldwide has increased during the last decade, especially in Africa and in in Asia. This is the UN Habitat Report. So these are some of the issues which I think I thought I would share. They are sort of not exactly cohesively put together like your papers. Your papers were fantastic. I wish someday I will write a paper like you, but that someday is not here yet. I have some suggestions for policymakers related to climate change, which I'm going to read out to you. An effective early warning system of alert for weather, storms, cyclones, clouds, etc. Can you hear me? Equally effective way to move people in risky zones to safe places with availability of shelter, fully equipped with water, sanitation, and procurement of food. Use of technology to inform people immediately about the impending disaster. Most cities in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia have no sewer and storm drain, certainly not for those living in informal settlements, so change this. Recognize heat wave as a natural disaster under climate change in India, so that it can come under disaster management law. Create a heat code along with heat bulb temperature measures in all cities and create a ward-level decentralized heat action plan. Create building codes that will not allow mining at the periphery of the cities that make the lands or the hills very vulnerable to collapse where poor often build their homes. Prevent building homes on hazardous areas like floodplains, sea coasts, hill slopes, etc. Decouple tenure issues and provision of basic services in informal settlements and ensure every slum dweller has access to basic services irrespective of her legal status. Ensure basic infrastructure is provided to all, water piped into homes, skewers, toilets, storm and surface drains, and regularly collected household waste. Provide all-weather roads and paths that will allow the residents to move away from rising flood levels and allow access to emergency vehicles. More land like village commons available to poor people and build temporary shelters. Give housing subsidies to people in informal settlements to build homes with materials that will not absorb intense heat and will not leak during monsoons. Make affordable, available, accessible rental housing to poor in all metros. Since women and children suffer the most in any natural disasters, keep a portion of the budget aside to deal with specific problems faced by women and children in slums, including health-related issues, and increase the health budget to 2.5. I'm sure you know that our health budget is lower than South Africa. Did you know that? Yeah. Do advocacy and knowledge building of the poor people in slums related to schemes that are meant for them but they cannot take advantage of. Partner with community-based organizations and take their help in kind to lower the cost and speed up implementations. And stop subsidies to fossil fuel and instead increase subsidies to solar wind energy creation, thus making it affordable for some dwellers for cooking. All this ensure that the clean and green future is enjoyable for all citizens. And I just want to end with a quote from Greta Thunberg and Vanessa Nakate. And they wrote an open letter to the global media. They say, the climate crisis isn't just about extreme weather. It is about people, real people, and the very people who have done the least to create the climate crisis and are suffering the most. Thank you very much.